distancing rules. Hello, it's good to have you with us. I'm Daniel Che here to bring the latest. Let's begin with our top story. Moscow's invasion entered its 8th day of assault. Kherson became the first Ukrainian city to be completely seized by Russian forces amid intensifying international condemnation and demands of an immediate withdrawal of troops. Our Kim Dong-yeon is standing by on the line with the latest. Jian, can we expect a breakthrough in talks between the two sides?
Well, Daniel, talks between the representatives of Ukraine and Russia were reported to have taken place an hour ago along the Ukrainian-Belarus border, but we cannot independently verify whether it's actually taking place as scheduled. But there are wide speculation that there's not going to be a major breakthrough to de-escalate tensions. Ahead of the meeting, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told reporters in Moscow that Russia will press ahead with its military action in Ukraine until its goals are achieved, which is largely to overthrow the current government and replace it for one that is Moscow-friendly.
We are ready to talk, but we will continue our operation. We can't allow ourselves to preserve infrastructure that threatens the safety of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Demilitarization in this sense, I mean the destruction of the infrastructure that threatens us, will be completed.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian side said earlier Wednesday that it won't accept any ultimatums from the Kremlin.
Well, what we know is that Russian forces laid siege to key urban areas across Ukraine. Can you tell us more about the front lines in the country right now?
Well, Russian troops had advanced into strategic cities despite strong resistance from Ukrainian troops. In fact, Kherson officially became the first major city to be captured by Russian forces. Rows of Russian tanks have also been seen in the front lines advancing into Ukrainian capital city of Kyiv, while airstrikes continued in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. To the east, the port of Mariupol has been encircled and cut off by Russian advance as the port city had to endure 15 straight hours of bombardment. Meanwhile, U.S. officials was quoted by Western media outlets saying a massive Russian convoy of tanks and combat vehicles was stalled outside Kyiv due to shortages of military supplies and low morale of Russian troops.
But the war in Ukraine has taken its toll on civilians as families fled from their homes to neighboring countries for safety. What's the situation like for the refugees?
Right, Daniel. Well, the United Nations say more than 1 million people have fled Ukraine since the war started 8 days ago. And for some who witnessed war the first time when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, say it doesn't make the shock any less stressful the second time.
I have been through this before, but experiencing it for the second time was an equally huge shock. You start living in peace, and then the same happens again.
The International Criminal Court opened a war crimes investigation into the Russian invasion of Ukraine that involves allegations of war crimes against humanity, or genocide committed on any part of the territory of Ukraine. The civilian death toll in Ukraine is 2,000, according to Ukrainian authorities, while the UN agency has confirmed 227 civilian deaths up until March 1st. Meanwhile, the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly adopted a resolution on Wednesday demanding that Russia immediately end its assault. EU ministers, as well as ministers from Ukraine, the U.S., the U.K., and Canada, are slated to meet this Friday in Brussels to discuss the Ukrainian refugee crisis, in which the UN agency projects it'll shoot up to 4 million as the war escalates. Back to you.
All right, Jian, thank you for those updates. President Moon Jae-in held a phone meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart. The South Korean leader delivered his respect for people in Ukraine fighting against Russia and hope for peace. Volodymyr Zelensky thanked Moon for Seoul's support and asked for help to overcome the crisis. South Korea has joined sanctions against Moscow and plans to provide humanitarian aid worth $10 million while also protecting Ukrainians in South Korea. President Moon also asked for the safety of dozens of Korean nationals remaining in Ukraine. President Moon led an expanded meeting of the NSC. The focus was on security threats South Korea could face in the longer term to ensure the next government can promptly deal with those issues. Yoon Ahn shares with us what was discussed.
President Moon Jae-in held an expanded National Security Council meeting on Thursday to discuss future security threats. The meeting focused on dealing with longer-term security threats that South Korea could face between now and 2030. President Moon briefly mentioned the instability triggered by the Ukraine crisis, while stressing the need to establish the groundwork to allow the next government to tackle issues stemming from the fast-changing global security environment. The Blue House says the meeting focused on 4 sectors: politics, economy, new security, and emerging technologies. In politics, the president and officials discussed the growing competition between democracy and authoritarianism, as well as political issues entangled with supply chains or exports. To tackle those issues, they stressed the need for international cooperation. As for the economy, key issues were regulations on carbon emissions, energy transition, and the global supply chain. South Korea aims to put more efforts toward energy security and securing minerals and grains from overseas. On the security of artificial intelligence and space, the NSC focused on finding and protecting new technologies, with more details to be unveiled later this month. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
A vast majority of the UN General Assembly voted in favor of a resolution denouncing Russia's aggression against Ukraine and demanding an immediate withdrawal of its troops. This comes as the U.S. announced new sweeping sanctions against Moscow. Kim Dong-yeon tells us more.
The UN General Assembly has voted overwhelmingly for a resolution denouncing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The resolution, backed by 141 of the Assembly's 193 members, was passed Wednesday in a rare emergency session called by the UN Security Council to discuss the Ukraine crisis. It calls for Russia to stop fighting and withdraw its forces immediately, completely, and unconditionally. South Korea also supported the resolution, while 5 countries, including North Korea, Belarus, and Syria, voted against. Speaking before the vote, the U.S. ambassador to the UN stressed that the war must stop.
And today, we stand together in holding Russia accountable for its violations of international law and to address the horrific human rights and humanitarian crisis unfolding before our eyes.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration detailed a new set of economic sanctions against Russia and its ally Belarus. They include restrictions on Moscow's oil exports, as well as sweeping sanctions targeting Russia's defense-related entities. Washington also explained its extension of export control policies to Belarus and preventing the diversion of technology and software to Russia through the country. This, the Biden administration says, will severely limit their ability to obtain the materials needed to support their military aggression against Ukraine. These measures come on the heels of Washington's banning of Russian aircraft from U.S. airspace. Over in Europe, the EU decided to cut Russian banks from the SWIFT payment system on Wednesday. Accordingly, SWIFT said in a statement that it would cut off 7 Russian banks from the network from March 12th. The 27-member bloc also banned Kremlin-controlled media outlets from broadcasting into the bloc. Kim Dong-yeon, Arirang News.
Athletes from Russia and Belarus are banned from competing in the 2022 Beijing Paralympics. While the International Paralympic Committee decided to let them compete unaffiliated a day earlier, they announced the change after an emergency meeting Thursday morning. The IPC said it seeks to preserve the integrity and safety of the Games after multiple countries and players threatened to pull out. Russian teams and athletes have even been banned from other sporting events too, including international football. Moving on to other stories now, Seoul has joined the Global Peace Light campaign, which involves having major landmarks lit up in yellow and blue in support of Ukraine. From this week, there are 7 landmarks, including City Hall, the island of Sebitsum in the Han River, Seoul Media Campus, and Seoul Tower. The lights are on for 4 to 5 hours every evening. The city government plans to work with more public and private venues to expand the campaign this month. It will continue until there's peace in Ukraine. Main opposition People Power parties Yoon Ahn and Ahn Cheol-soo from the People's Party are merging. The decision was reached on the eve of early voting for South Korea's presidential election. Kim Hyun-sung fills us in.
4 leading presidential candidates, now down to 3. Ahn Cheol-soo from the People's Party on Thursday decided to throw his weight behind candidate Yoon Suk-yeol from the People Power Party.
I solemnly promise in front of everybody that we'll both work for a successful future for South Korea and the united government. I, Ahn Cheol-soo, have decided to support candidate Yoon Suk-yeol.
I, Yoon Suk-yeol, accept candidate Ahn Cheol-soo's resolve and will win this election to create a successful united government.
The candidates apologized for this merger coming so late, but said that they have decided to put aside their differences for a bigger purpose, a change in the ruling party. They promised to build their government on 5 principles so that it looks toward the future, makes reforms, prevents disease, and is practical and unites the country. After the election, they're also planning to merge their 2 parties, the People Power Party and the People's Party. Ahn on Thursday afternoon visited the National Election Commission to officially drop out of the race. The other parties in the race were not impressed by this last-minute change.
We see their sudden overnight merger as a way for them to just hand out seats among themselves. The Lee Jae-myung campaign will respond to this calmly and will do its best until the last, with exceptional resolve and determination.
Candidate Ahn believed in ending 2-party politics and hoped for multi-party politics, but he ended up kneeling in front of the 2 major parties, as I have also hoped to work with them to achieve political change that overcomes the major parties. I feel deeply sorry for his decision.
A last-minute curveball thrown into the race. Will Ahn Cheol-soo's weight be enough to tip the scales in the election? South Korea will find out in about a week. Kim Dong-yeon, Arirang News.
The merger announcement surprised and upset many. It comes just a day before early voting starts. All eyes are on how the team-up will affect the outcome of the election. Lee Kyung-un provides a deeper analysis.
Following the merger announcement in the morning, Yoon was back on campaign trail on Thursday. Despite the expectations of many, Ahn Cheol-soo did not tag along. But during Yoon's campaign speech in the central city of Sejong, he did talk about the merger.
Mr. Ahn and I will expand our political philosophies and values so that we can show greater politics that reflect the opinions of more people.
The merger was thought to be technically over up until Thursday. It was Ahn who initially proposed it, but he later retracted the idea as neither side could agree on Ahn's proposed holding of a public opinion poll to decide who would ultimately be on the ballot. And just last weekend, the 2 sides initiated talks which ultimately broke down. But the last-minute agreement came as a surprise, coming 1 day before early voting, which was considered the last meaningful day for the merger. Because during early voting, ballots are printed on site, so voters will see withdrawn next to Ahn Cheol-soo's name. This is a good thing for Yoon, as it will be a chance for him to get some of the votes that otherwise could have gone to Ahn. However, on election day, withdrawn will not be written next to Ahn on the ballots because they've already been printed. Instead, voters will get an instruction that Ahn Cheol-soo has withdrawn. That's why the most optimal day for the merger was considered to be before the day of ballot printing, which will leave only 1 candidate's name on the ballot. For the overseas voters who have already voted for Ahn Cheol-soo, those votes will not be counted. Lee Kyung-un, Arirang News.
DP's presidential nominee remained relatively quiet about the merger. Lee Jae-myung continued rallying to garner support in the capital, which is known to have many undecided voters, and share ideas on gender equality as well as women's safety. Kim Dong-yeon takes us to the scene.
Unlike his party members who have spoken out against the merger of opposition parties, ruling Democratic Party of Korea's presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung has so far refrained from speaking directly about it, but said it was, in the end, left to the people.
It's the people that decide the country's fate. I believe the people will make the final decision, not for certain politicians, but for the livelihoods of the citizens and the country's history.
On Thursday, candidate Lee Jae-myung hit busy areas of Seoul with the early voting set to start the next day, making sure he gains as much support as possible in the capital, where many are still believed to be undecided. In the afternoon, former candidate Kim Dong-yeon, who dropped out of the race the day before in support of Lee, joined him in front of a crowd. This was the first time the two were at a rally together. Kim claimed that Lee was a candidate who could reform politics and break up the political establishment. He added that Lee is the one to resolve conflicts rather than start them. He also spent earlier in the day appealing to women pledging for gender equality and, in particular, their safety.
First, I will protect women from sex crimes. I will revise the laws and measures so that victims of sex crimes or stalking can be protected more quickly and more definitely so they can feel safe.
He added that he will expand his policy of a one-stop digital sex crime victim support center in Gyeonggi-do province to something that is nationwide. In addition, he said that he will put forward policies that will guarantee the use of maternity and paternity leave. Kim Dong-yeon, Arirang News.
As of 9 p.m. local time, South Korea's daily COVID-19 tally exceeded 240,000 for the first time. Authorities still expect a peak to be reached this month. They may make changes to select distancing rules. Kim Bo-kyung brings the updates.
South Korea reported 198,803 new COVID-19 cases on Thursday, bringing the total number of cases seen in the country to almost 3.7 million. Although below the 200,000 mark, the figure is still around 28,000 more than for the same period the previous week. The positivity rate has gone over 50%. The number of critically ill patients increased slightly to 766, and there were 128 more deaths, which is a record high. More than 857,000 people are isolating or being treated at home for COVID-19, while a little over half of the beds for severely ill patients are in use. Among the new cases, Seoul metropolitan city saw more than 43,000 new cases, going over the 40,000 mark for 2 consecutive days. Regarding how schools brace for the first day of school on Wednesday, the Education Ministry said it is working to make schools safer. The ministry is recommending that students use a self-diagnosis mobile app to share their health condition with schools. More than 83% of students from kindergartens, elementary, middle, and high schools have participated in self-diagnosis tests. Among them, less than 2.7% were advised not to go to school. The schools also provided rapid antigen testing kits for preemptive tests.
As planned, we have secured 6,060,000 rapid antigen testing kits for the first week of March and provided one for each student. The second week's supply of 13 million will be given to students and faculty members by March 4th.
The ministry is also operating movable PCR screening centers for students and staff. Meanwhile, the government is considering easing measures as it sees any strengthening of measures to be ineffective. Originally, social gathering caps of a maximum 6 people and 10 p.m. shutdown orders were to remain until March 13th. However, as the government is to put all efforts into minimizing the number of critically ill patients and deaths rather than the number of the cases, the country is mulling over easing the measures. Though not confirmed yet, the government might announce the changes to the rules as early as Friday after consulting with medical experts, business owners, and local governments. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea has temporarily allowed medical professionals to diagnose and treat patients from a distance using telecommunications technology. Virtual healthcare has since boomed here in the nation. Lee Shu sheds light on this phenomenon.
When 28-year-old Kim Hee-kyung needs a medical consultation, she doesn't need to take time out of her day to visit a doctor. All she needs to do is to reach for her tablet and launch a mobile application. She puts in her personal info, selects her symptoms, and voila! Within minutes, she's face-to-face with the doctor in the comfort of her home.
안녕하세요.
네, 안녕하세요, 선생님.
어디가 불편하셔서
After the virtual consultation, the doctor makes a diagnosis and writes a prescription that is delivered to her home. With the spread of COVID-19, the South Korean government has temporarily allowed healthcare professionals to evaluate, diagnose, and treat patients from a distance using telecommunications technology. Since being legally permitted, the number of patients who have availed of the service has grown significantly.
Among the perks of telemedicine is that patients can see doctors and receive prescriptions quicker than they would during a traditional visit to a clinic. Through telemedicine, patients suffering from COVID-19 are receiving prescriptions quickly.
But its perks are not limited during the pandemic.
Here at Yoon Ahn University Hospital, telemedicine is offered to Koreans overseas and foreigners in South Korea who may not be able to access the care they need where they are.
The doctor checks the condition of the patient located overseas as she would in an offline consultation during a conference call.
We began offering telemedicine to Koreans overseas as medical care can be less accessible and patients can experience cultural or language barriers during their care.
That's not to say there aren't limitations to this practice. There are initial costs associated with the technology, both for doctors and patients, and some are concerned that virtual medical examination may not be as effective.
I expect the advancement of medical technology and the development of digital healthcare will help alleviate current limitations.
Legal experts say changes must be made to the current law to allow telemedicine to be practiced permanently.
No countries outside of South Korea ban telemedicine entirely. South Korea needs to take a more open stance towards telemedicine and make the necessary reform to its medical law.
이시후, Arirang News.
Data shows South Korea's per capita income rose by more than 10% in 2021, the first spike in 3 years. Updated estimates still indicate the economy itself grew by 4%. Min Suk-hyun helps us look beyond the figures.
South Korea's per capita income has risen for the first time in 3 years as the country recovers from the pandemic-driven economic downturn. Preliminary data from the Bank of Korea on Thursday shows that the country's cross-national income per capita stood at $35,168 in 2021. South Korea's GNI per capita, when measured in dollars, has been down for 2 straight years, but last year it bounced back more than 10% from a year earlier. The central bank attributed the growth to the nation's economic recovery from the pandemic and the Korean won's appreciation against the US dollar.
In 2021, the real GDP grew 4%, and the GDP deflator rose 2.3%, while the exchange rate fell 3%, meaning the Korean won was strong against the US dollar. As a result, per capita income increased by 10.3% on year.
Meanwhile, the BOK's preliminary data shows that South Korea's economic growth in 2021 hit 4%. This is the same as its forecast in January and a sharp rise from a year before when the economy dipped 0.9% due to the economic fallout from the pandemic. But for the fourth quarter, the central bank revised up its estimate by a notch to 1.2% on robust exports and private spending. During the October to December period, exports grew 5% on year following strong demand for semiconductors, coal, and petroleum products, while private consumption climbed 1.6% on year from eased virus measures. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Weather conditions will get milder tomorrow. The capital region will be warmer than today with highs reaching up to 14 degrees Celsius. But most regions will see wide temperature gaps between day and night of 10 to 20 degrees. Under such conditions of fluctuating temperatures, our immune systems become weaker, so please be careful not to catch a cold. Light showers are in the forecast for central regions and the surrounding areas. Expect about 5 millimeters for central regions and Jeollabuk-do province. Mountainous regions of Gangwon-do province will see light snowflakes flying around. Even with the rain or snow, keep in mind that most regions will be under dusty conditions. Most regions will be under partly cloudy skies for the morning. Seoul will start off at 1 degree Celsius. Daytime highs will be 1 to 3 degrees higher than today. Seoul and Chuncheon will get up to 14 degrees, Daejeon 16, and Daegu will make it to 17 degrees. Cold conditions are back in the forecast this weekend. Morning lows will drop to negative figures in the capital region. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That's all from us. As always, thank you for watching.
Find the ways of taekwondo within yourself. The mind that honors respect and kindness. The valor that fears no challenges. The perfect balance of body and mind. Discover yourself. The way of finding your infinite potential.